and we're looking for a liftoff at 10:38 this morning. Mike, we found out since our last report that the launch window could go as late as 1:38 this afternoon if necessary, so it's still a 3-hour window.
As they closed the door, the last thing that they did was pull the heater hose out. So that gives you an idea of how cold it is up there. The astronauts don't want to freeze either, and they know.
T-minus 3 minutes and counting. Gimbal checks now complete. T-minus 2 minutes, 44 seconds and counting. Retraction has started of the gaseous oxygen vent hood. 90 seconds and counting. The 51L mission ready to go. T-minus 1 and counting. Sound suppression water system now on. The hydrogen burn igniters have been armed. These igniters will be fired at T-minus 10 seconds to burn off any residual hydrogen. T-minus 45 seconds and counting. The solid rocket booster flight instrumentation recorders gone into the record mode. That's all right. Coming up on the 30-second point in our countdown. T-minus 30 seconds, and we've had a go for auto sequence start. The SRB hydraulic power units have started. T-minus 21 seconds, and the solid rocket booster engine gimbal now underway. T-minus 15 seconds. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. We have main engine start. 4,
there it goes.
1, and liftoff.
Oh my God.
Look how bright it is. It's bright as the sun. Wait till the sound comes, about 15 seconds.
There it is. Sound.
Is that our sound?
That's here. That's what we're finally hearing. Feeling too, I think. Oh, look at that. Oh.
Which is the Challenger?
I'm not sure. The one going up.
Which one is going? The one on the right?
Yeah, because it's turning, I guess. It's going farther up. Oh, Lord. Can you get the whole thing in view? Look at this trail. See why we like to bring our camera?
What?
That wasn't supposed to happen?
Where are they? Something's going on. Sal, see what's going on 1300. Anything on 13?
Nothing. When they stop coverage, they really stop.
That thing should go, you should see that vapor trail so it just goes for a long time. And I've never seen all that other stuff come down.
Nothing on the other stations I checked.
I have never seen those never.
Never see what? When they split off separately, you mean?
Never.
No, not like that.
Never.
And that should have.
Usually it's way high
Yeah,
when they
that
do
should have broke off.
So it
down
split
there.
up too early?
A lot of times it's even hard to see it come off.
Is that what happened? It split way too early? It's so deceptive.
That guy's radio system blew up. I think it blew up. Right there with that couple big explosions.
So what does that mean for the shuttle? Do they have enough power to get to orbit? How come the radio station switch off?
major fatality.
Hopefully not a fatality. What station is that? Same one?
They don't have any words yet.
Is it the same station though?
Yeah. Remember what happened to all the pieces? That's gone.
Apparently exploded and that impact in the water at a point approximately 28.64 degrees north, 80.28 degrees west. We are awaiting the location of the recovery forces in the field to see what may be possible at this point. And we will keep you advised as further information becomes available. This is Mission Control.
Oh my God.
Would that be able to go for you?
Picture of it, the last picture, actually the 25th picture on the frame, I wasn't going to take anymore, and when it went off like that, I was watching the camera, and I knew it wasn't right.
Is it turning its
I've
stuff
never
up
seen it do that
quickly?
before.
That's the turn immediately? Oh, we were out there yesterday on the launch floor, watching from the other side.
Is that thin trail where the shuttle went?
No, that's just been like coming down. the vehicle exploded, and there's pieces of the shuttle raining into the ocean.
Where?
Into the Atlantic, and there are recovery. She's just had something on a different station. I'm going to try to get a different station. There's recovery ships out there that are going to pick up with it.
Do you know what station it is?
I'm going to try to find it. They're not broadcasting.
Turn it up, Sal. Is it way up? Turn it up, Sal. I'm sorry. I'm just going to give me that.
To repeat, we had apparently normal ascent with the data coming to all positions being normal up through approximately the time of main engine throttle back up to 104%. At about approximately a minute or so into the flight, there was an apparent explosion. The flight dynamics officer reported, tracking reported that the vehicle had exploded and impacted the water in an area approximately located at 28.64 degrees north, 80.28 degrees west.
Shortly after takeoff, the space shuttle exploded in a cloud of smoke with 6 astronauts and New Hampshire schoolteacher Krista McAuliffe on board. NASA's Hugh Harris made the announcement.
We have a report from the flight dynamics officer that the vehicle has exploded. Flight director confirms that. We are looking at checking with the recovery forces to see what can be done at this point.
Once again, the space shuttle exploded shortly after takeoff just a few minutes ago. In Washington, President Reagan getting set for tonight's State of the Union address. Still no word from NASA on exactly what caused the explosion.
Only one part. Looks like the boosters blew off.
One little, yeah.
Did you see it?
It blew off.
Described here in one wire service account we've just received. Others say they saw a bright flash of orange flame. Suddenly, a huge fireball, then some silence from mission control, and then suddenly the word that we received that the shuttle Challenger, with its crew, including teacher observer Krista McAuliffe, exploded. The shuttle went down in the Atlantic Ocean off the Kennedy Space Center, and apparently all are lost.
NASA has had no radio contact at all, or had none, with the shuttle after the explosion. It is now in pieces in the Atlantic Ocean off the Kennedy Space Center.
Mission control saying debris from the shuttle impacted several miles out into the Atlantic. The recovery crews are speeding now in that direction. On board is the commander, Francis Dick Scobie, pilot Michael J. Smith, Judith Resnick, Ronald McNair, Ellison Onizuka, Gregory Jarvis, and of course, Concord, New Hampshire schoolteacher Krista McAuliffe.
The 25th flight of the shuttle program is a tragedy. The Challenger exploded, and there is no indication there is any way any of the crew could survive. The veteran space correspondent for the shuttle program and others, and our colleague John Lyons, is joining us now from London. John?
John Lyons, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me? Yes, we can, John.
Okay. This is, of course, the one thing that everybody in the space program has said all along is not a survivable type accident. Any kind of explosion that occurs in that first 2 minutes and 4 seconds, there's just no way that they have any way of controlling the vehicle.
John, is it conceivable this could have been weather-related, in your opinion?
No, I don't think so. It seems to have happened. Of course, you know, millions of things are going on in that spacecraft all the time, but it seems to have coincided with what they call throttle up when they take the engines on the spacecraft spacecraft and go from 65% up to 104%, you're giving it full power, that something happened. As of right now, obviously nobody seems to know, but if it had anything to do with the solid rocket boosters exploding, they would have gone out of control and the spacecraft would break up. If it didn't, maybe part of the shuttle itself could have landed in the water.
But with an explosion of this magnitude, as we saw it on the NASA TV monitors here in our studios, this was a major explosion. I likened it to a Roman candle going off. Certainly nothing that, from a layman's point of view, could have been survivable.
It was like a snaking across the sky, John, the flame and the smoke.
Yeah, we're now getting a feed on a monitor here in London. The astronauts, the flight controllers, when I was doing simulations back several years ago, didn't even want to talk about this phase of the flight because when they designed the space shuttle, they designed it with these two big solid rocket boosters that basically throw it up into space. And if either one of those blew up or if the external tank blew up during that period of time, they said there's just no way out.
John,
remember that during the early first 4 flights, they had ejection seats in the spacecraft for the commander and for the co-pilot. Those were taken out when they completed the test program because they could not have provided ejection seats for all of the crew members.
John, what is this going to do you think, to the shuttle program? Obviously, this is the same technology they intend to use for all the other shuttle flights.
Just the amount of fire that you saw up there.
Well, it's catastrophic. It's absolutely catastrophic. It'll take them a long time to figure out why it happened, obviously, and what made it happen, but it would seem that there is something basic in the design of the space shuttle that may be flawed, and that they said they were getting normal data up till the time of explosion, which means they got no clues up to that point that something was about to happen. Obviously, this year is out, and this terrible, terrible tragedy will be an extreme blow to NASA.
And of course, the human tragedy cannot be measured. We're talking about 7 people. We're talking about a school teacher from Concord, New Hampshire. This was possibly one of the most popular shuttle flights we've had in a long time. The shuttle program, the American public, as it tends to do, became very blasé after the shuttle.
It almost seemed routine,
very
almost
routine.
As if you were getting on an airliner and going somewhere.
Yes, but now they've had so much attention paid to this, and everybody was looking forward so much to the lessons from outer space, and now this is, what it's done to NASA is obvious. The human tragedy cannot be measured. The lives
that's
of
certainly
7
true.
people.
I can say that I was down for the Columbia launch a couple of weeks ago, and although to those of us who watch these things go up, that it may have become routine, but it certainly has not become routine for the people who prepare those rockets, the flight directors, the controllers, and all of those people, the safety people, are extremely conscious of all of that. So I don't think anybody should jump to conclusions and say that it has just become some sort of lax security or something like that. This is a highly risky business of firing off these rockets. You're taking 7 million pounds of fire, thrust, to shoot them up into space, and when something goes wrong during that early part of the flight, it can only be catastrophic, and it certainly has become that.
You are listening to live special coverage from ABC Radio, the tragedy today at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Just about 2 minutes after what seemed to be a routine liftoff, the Space Shuttle Challenger, with a crew of 7 on board, experienced an explosion. It veered toward the ocean, and the pieces of the shuttle and its solid rocket boosters fell into the ocean. And although we have not received any confirmation from Mission Control, it certainly does appear that all of those on board have been killed.
NASA has been very quiet. They have not even shown a replay of the launch, which they normally do many times shortly after the launch. 7 people were on board, but less than 2 minutes after launch, the Challenger exploded, veered out of control in a crazy snake-like motion across the bright
You ever seen it
blue
before?
sky.
No. I used to live in Orlando. I must have saw about a dozen of them go up.
And then
what to expect.
As soon as that thing did that, I knew.
Strange.
I knew. As it went up just before it exploded, it should have just continued up and then out over the ocean, and then way out where you could just barely see it still. The boosters will separate if you're,
Could have been a paramedic jumping
you're
into
lucky.
the water.
It's a clear day today, you probably could have seen it.
But
there would be no parachutes on board the shuttle. None of the crew members have parachutes.
Yes, we know that.
So this, John, again, we should emphasize an accident like this for the people on board that shuttle is absolutely inescapable. Once you're there and once you're heading up toward orbit like that and something of this magnitude happens, this is nothing that can be survivable.
That is what NASA says about an accident of an explosion within the first 2 minutes of flight. I think also, if there was any way that thing separated, that the Challenger itself separated, and as I said, I have not seen that part of it on television.
I said, that's not turn around.
There are T-38 aircraft in the area that would be out looking for them. There are also helicopters which would have already been in the air at launch.
I didn't know which to follow.
And,
I didn't know what was going on.
A lot of people out there. Apparently a clear day.
It's a very clear day.
Soon.
It's a very clear day, John. The Challenger itself was obscured by the ball of flame when the explosion took place. And then we saw, looked like a dozen or so, looked like pieces of equipment falling out of the sky, and each of them carrying tails of smoke with them as they fell in a helter-skelter fashion into the ocean.
Challenger, go with throttle up.
The Space Shuttle Challenger is destroyed just a little more than 1 minute after liftoff.
15 seconds. Velocity 2,900 feet per second. Altitude 9 nautical
All
miles.
7 astronauts on board are killed.
From ABC, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings. Tonight, reporting from Washington.
It is the worst disaster in the history of the American space program, and President Reagan has declared a week of mourning for the 7 astronauts, 5 men and 2 women, who lost their lives on their way into space this morning. Now, we know that many of you have heard the news many hours ago and may even have seen some of our extended coverage this afternoon. But many others of you, we surmise, have been at work, and thus we're going to spend virtually our entire broadcast this evening on what is not only a crushingly sad day for families, friends, and colleagues of the astronauts, but also an enormous shock to the manned space program, which before today had gone so well. Never before have American lives been lost in flight. We will try to answer many of your questions, but as of this evening, many questions remain unanswered. We begin at Cape Canaveral with ABC's John Quinones.
They gathered for what turned out to be their last meal at 6:48 this morning, the ceremonial breakfast. For months, they had trained together. Astronaut Ellison Onizuka from Hawaii, the star of this mission, New Hampshire schoolteacher Krista McAuliffe, mission commander Dick Scobie, pilot Michael Smith, astronauts Judith Resnick and Ronald McNair, and payload specialist Gregory Jarvis. After 3 days of delays, they appeared tired, but quickly rejuvenated by applause as they headed for the launch pad.
Scobie, followed by mission specialist Judy Resnick, Ron McNair, and pilot Mike Smith, followed by Krista McAuliffe, teacher in space, Ellison Onizuka, and payload specialist Greg Jarvis.
Final preparations before liftoff. The ground crew gives McAuliffe an apple for the teacher, and wishes of good luck. Initially, liftoff was scheduled for 9:38 this morning, but again there were problems. A hard freeze overnight left ice on the launch pad, a 2-hour delay, and then NASA discovers a faulty fire detector on board the shuttle, another hour's delay while it's replaced. Finally, the liftoff was set for 11:38. A crowd of some 500 spectators, including 18 visiting school children from McAuliffe's hometown of Concord, New Hampshire, waited anxiously and then counted down. The liftoff appeared flawless. The spectators, including Krista McAuliffe's parents, Grace and Edward Corrigan, watched proudly through tears of joy. 65 seconds into flight, NASA Control orders Commander Scobie to go to full power.
Challenger, go with throttle up. Challenger, go with throttle up.
Suddenly, an explosion.
Flight controllers here looking very carefully at the situation. Obviously a major malfunction.
NASA loses all communication with Challenger, but the crowd still does not realize that something's gone wrong. Within seconds, Challenger disintegrates.
We have a report from the flight dynamics officer that the vehicle has exploded.
For the spectators and Krista McAuliffe's parents, joy turns to confusion, worry, and a realization of tragedy. The $1.2 billion spaceship, its 7 crew members, and their satellite payload disappear.
I thought the flight was going fine. And then I heard them say, major malfunction. And then the person beside me said, it's exploded. And it was... I couldn't speak. It was...
Within minutes, emergency rescue teams parachuted in, converging on a search area 18 miles east of Cape Canaveral.
Debris continued to fall for 50 minutes and more. And obviously you can't send aircraft and ships into an area where debris is falling, where they themselves may be endangered.
Late this afternoon, after 6 hours of searching, NASA reports they found no survivors.
These searches have not revealed any evidence that the crew of Challenger survived.
Tonight, NASA and Cape Canaveral are in mourning. Tonight at Cape Canaveral, Vice President George Bush, accompanied by Senators Jake Garn and John Glenn, both former astronauts, expressed the nation's condolences to the families of the astronauts. Bush had a special message for American school children.
You must try to understand that spirit, bravery, and commitment are what make not only the space program, but all of life worthwhile. We must never, as people in our daily lives or as a nation, stop exploring, stop hoping, stop discovering. We must press on.
John Quinones, ABC News, Cape Canaveral.
This whole concept of a teacher in space has been important to the country, but especially to the children, as the Vice President alluded, ever since President Reagan in 1984 suggested there be a teacher in space. It was going to be a very big day in Krista McAuliffe's hometown of Concord, New Hampshire, and especially at the high school where she taught. ABC's Jay Shadler was there.
Krista McAuliffe's students and friends at Concord High School were ready to watch a dream come true that became witnesses to a nightmare.
2, 1, and liftoff.
In the moments after the launch, their celebrations drowned out the first news of the tragedy. But the clamor turned to quiet as this picture burned itself into their memories.
Reports from the flight dynamics officer indicate that the vehicle apparently exploded and that impact in the water.
Some people were covering their eyes, and some people were just watching the TV set with a blank look on their face.
It was really quite dramatic. At first, you know, everyone was really happy, all these smiles, and then suddenly you saw a lot of people crying in the halls, and it was really pretty sad.
Just moments before, Eileen O'Hara, Krista McAuliffe's good friend and classroom substitute, had shared this haunting sentiment with a local reporter.
Yeah, it's going to be hard to watch, because I want her to be safe, and I want her to have fun.
Now the public celebration had turned into private mourning and shock.
She was a part of us. She was part of a family. And it's like, if your sister or brother died, she'll be remembered. It was a hell. Just a hell.
Though Krista McAuliffe's students and friends have known her here in Concord for years, she became known to the nation when she decided to pursue her dreams. Those dreams had been sparked by President Reagan's announcement a year ago for a teacher astronaut. The search for that history maker brought 11,000 applications, but only one made the final grade.
And the winner, the teacher who will be going into space, Krista McAuliffe.
From the outset, she approached this mission and her training with the same ideals she brought to the classroom.
Well, it was a challenge, and it was something that I always ask my students, you know, to go and seek whatever they feel they can do and reach a little higher.
She wore her spirit on her hometown, loved it. Now they are remembering it. A special counselor will be brought to Concord High tomorrow to help students begin dealing with their loss. But perhaps Krista McAuliffe's own words echo the best advice.
To follow your instincts and go for your dreams, and you know, I hope they achieve that.
Jay Shadler, ABC News, Concord, New Hampshire.
When Challenger was 10 miles up and 18 miles downrange and that explosion occurred, we all knew a great deal about Krista McAuliffe, but we've become so accustomed to the shuttle going up and coming down now that the other astronauts on board were just not as well known to us. Well, they are today, and ABC's Stone Phillips has been looking at them.
When they posed, it was like a portrait of America. Men and women, war veterans and first-time astronauts, parents, and even a classical pianist. Their commander was Francis Scobie, age 46, from Washington State, an astronaut after 22 years in the Air Force. This was his second shuttle mission. Second in command, pilot Michael Smith, age 40, a decorated Navy pilot from North Carolina. Like Scobie, he'd seen combat in Vietnam and trained as a test pilot. And like the commander, he was a husband and father. This was Smith's first shuttle mission. Mission specialist Ellison Onizuka was the first Hawaiian astronaut who believed in the benefits of the space program.
There are a lot of outcomes from these projects which will affect both our society and the rest of the world.
Onizuka is survived by his wife and 2 daughters. 36-year-old mission specialist Judy Resnick was a shuttle veteran, her assignment to operate the shuttle's mechanical arm. She was on board the shuttle Discovery in 1984 when a launch was aborted after the engines had fired. Gregory Jarvis was on board to conduct tests on the effects of weightlessness on liquids carried in tanks. Born in Detroit, trained as an Air Force satellite engineer, Jarvis was on his first shuttle mission. Ronald McNair, age 36, from South Carolina, brought a background in physics and laser technology to the shuttle program. This was the second trip to space for a husband and father who saw space travel as a calling for mankind.
I see it as something that we must do, and I see it as something that's part of man's nature to explore.
These 6, along with Krista McAuliffe, the first teacher in space, now a tragic page in NASA history. Stone Phillips, ABC News.
When we come back, we'll try to analyze what happened. It isn't easy. Throughout the many hours today before NASA officials came out at Cape Canaveral and made an official statement, there was an incredible anxiety that many people in the nation seemed to feel about getting an answer to what had really happened. Well, the real answer may be a very long time in coming, but ABC's Lynn Scher, who covers space for us on a regular basis and has for a long time, is with us tonight in our Los Angeles bureau. Lynn?
Well, Peter, all the NASA experts, those review boards, are certainly going to check all the data they can gather, and they are going to be looking at all the pictures they can see. And those are the exact same pictures that we have been looking at also, and we've been taking a closer look at those last tragic moments. Here you see what they call a nominal ascent. All those words, textbook, picture perfect, and then suddenly a tiny flame just where the fuel lines go from the big external tank into Challenger itself. On the left with the arrow, a plume where gases from the tank are forming, obviously feeding the fire. Now you will see the flame creeping up the external tank in between the tank and the shuttle itself. This is the beginning of the huge catastrophic explosion that absolutely engulfed the entire system. You will see a second explosion right at the top of that big external tank. This is obviously what put the entire thing into flames and probably what destroyed the shuttle almost instantly. Now for a moment the smoke clears and we see emerging apparently the top of Challenger. We think this is the last picture we have ever seen of Challenger before it fell to the sea with its precious cargo. And as the sequence is going to continue, you will see that mammoth, horrible explosion on the right. One of the solid rocket boosters split away now from the tank and the shuttle itself. These boosters cannot be controlled once they're lit, so it has obviously gone off on its own into the wrong place, but it does not appear, I repeat, appear from what we can see that it was the cause of the explosion or that anything happened to it. So that's the sequence. We can see that. We can try to understand it. What we don't know is why it happened, and that's what we now need to find out. Peter?
Lynn, thank you very much. Joining us tonight from Houston is the former astronaut Gene Cernan from the Apollo program, and he also has seen this same sequence repeated many times throughout the day. Gene, I know your reluctance to speculate and share it with you, but do you see anything in those pictures which give us a clue?
I think the analysis Lynn presented, the only one we have to work with because we don't have access to the data, and it would take even us, if we had the time, weeks and weeks to analyze it. But just simply from the pictures, it sounds to me like her analysis, as it was portrayed, has got some substance to it. We can't answer why. We don't know why. We don't know why it might have happened, but from those pictures we might very well be able to see what happened. Remember that tank that she referred to was carrying thousands and thousands of pounds of liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen. Hydrogen is a propellant. It burns, it explodes. Liquid oxygen is the oxidizer, like air, which supports the fire, which allows it to burn. And if you burn it as a controlled substance, if you meter it and you burn them together properly like you do in the engines, it's an ally. But when you allow them to join in an uncontrolled atmosphere, what can happen did happen.
Gene, very quickly, I'm afraid, but can you tell us why there was no escape mechanism on board today?
Well, the shuttle was designed early with ejection seats, so that if something occurred, the crew on those first 3 or 4 flights could get out. It was a test program. The evolution of the shuttle in an operational vehicle took those seats out. The only escape mechanism, as it was planned, was that the shuttle itself, with an impending problem, one you could see coming, could get off those tanks, turn around, and land back at Kennedy Space Center. Obviously, they did not have time for that because they didn't know the catastrophe was occurring.
Gene Cernan, thank you very much from Houston, and Lynn Scher from Los Angeles. When we come back, we'll have the reaction from the President and from Congress. In official Washington today, the reaction has been much the same as anywhere else in the country. Shock and disbelief and sorrow. The President took the unprecedented step of postponing the State of the Union message, which he was due to get to Congress tonight. He will give it next week. He did go on television late this afternoon to comfort the nation. ABC Sam Donaldson at the White House.
The flag was lowered at the White House and other government buildings late this afternoon as President Reagan led the nation in mourning with a short address from the Oval Office.
Nancy and I are pained to the core of the tragedy of the Shuttle Challenger. We know we share this pain with all of the people of our country. This is truly a national loss.
The day began with the President conferring with congressional leaders about his State of the Union message scheduled for delivery tonight. When he heard the news of the shuttle disaster, his first thought was to go ahead with it. You can't stop governing the nation, Mr. Reagan told a group of reporters. But as the President and his advisors kept watching the television replays of the explosion and the reactions of relatives, school children, and others, Mr. Reagan changed his mind.
The President thought it was entirely appropriate that his State of the Union be deferred.
The State of the Union speech was put off until next Tuesday. Vice President Bush was dispatched to Cape Canaveral to express the President's concern to people there, and Mr. Reagan, in his own remarks, tried to explain to the school children who had watched the explosion, he said, why such things happen.
I know it's hard to understand, but sometimes painful things like this happen. It's all part of the process of exploration and discovery. It's all part of taking a chance and expanding man's horizons. The future doesn't belong to the faint-hearted. It belongs to the brave.
This was to have been another night of triumph for the President, who had planned to tell the Congress and the nation how good things are in the country. But the shuttle disaster has changed all that. Officials here are shaken by the loss and by the fact that it's happened on Mr. Reagan's watch. Sam Donaldson, ABC News, the White House.
This is Britt Hume. Officials usually keep emotions under control in Washington, but today there was no hiding them.
Well, it's very difficult for me to talk about it because these were my friends.
It's been an amazingly successful series of triumphs through the years. But it also has brought with the possibility of tragedy, and that's what we came up against today.
There were some calls to rein in NASA.
I think that some limit has to be placed on the PR that NASA indulges in.
I think the policy of sending civilians into space obviously had better be reevaluated.
But that seemed a minority sentiment.
Let us remember, in silent prayer, those who were involved in the spacecraft shuttle accident just a few minutes ago.
Now their names become history. But that drive of the human spirit will not die. In that flash of fire, it will be reborn again in other young men and young women who will read about them and learn.
Florida Congressman Nelson, who returned aboard the shuttle Columbia just last week, had lost none of his enthusiasm.
This is part of what you understand is part of the risk that you're taking. Of course I would go again, even if it were tomorrow.
I would go again tomorrow. If NASA would let me go, I would go again.
Unlike another costly and dangerous program, the military, the space program has always been popular here, seeming to represent something Americans like to think is theirs, the future. This tragedy may shake that feeling, but if today's reactions are a guide, not for long. Britt Hume, ABC News, on Capitol Hill.
Well, this tragedy has had repercussions well beyond the borders of the United States. When we come back. As ABC's Bill Blakemore now makes clear, there was shock and grief all across the country today, and all around the world.
That poor teacher, you know, you just think everything is just down pat, and then something like this happens. I feel awful.
The feeling that you get, that cold feeling all over, that only happens maybe 5 times in your lifetime.
Let's shut it slow, get it right now.
At midday, word flashed between people everywhere across the country.
Didn't you know that? Yeah, the space shuttle blew up this morning.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's very tragic. I think it's the most tragic thing since the death of Kennedy himself.
And as with Kennedy's death, people remember where they were the moment they heard.
I was in an elevator in Midtown Manhattan, and somebody said the shuttle just came down.
But it was in those schoolrooms around the country.
We have a report from the flight dynamics officer that the vehicle has exploded. My director confirms that. We are looking at checking with the recovery forces to see what can be done at this point. Can we get the cameras?
Pilot Mike Smith, Commander Dick Scobie, Judy Resnick, there it is. There you see.
The kids invited almost as if to a party for a live classroom lesson from space turned suddenly into a lesson in mortality.
You think that there's so much technology that, you know, they could keep things like this from happening.
I was horrified. I didn't think that would happen. I didn't think that would happen.
The shock was immediately felt around the world. Within 30 minutes of the explosion, Soviet TV showed it. In the Frankfurt airport, travelers stopped in their tracks. Back in America, test pilot Chuck Yeager showed the professionals' attitude to danger.
You don't give an awful lot of thought to it because, number one, you can't do anything about it when it happens.
But for most of us today, there was no professional detachment, just the sudden finality of it.
It was just a nice lift-off, and then right out the clear blue sky, boom, it happened. And it just made me feel bad.
Bill Blakemore, ABC News.
It made us all feel bad. We'll be back in a moment. It was largely because of the teacher, Krista McCullough. We can't recall a time since man set foot on the moon when much of the nation, and because it was so many children, were engaged in a particular mission. When President Reagan went on television this afternoon, he was talking not only to the children, but to all of us, trying to comfort a nation.
The crew of the Space Shuttle Challenger honored us for the manner in which they lived their lives. We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them this morning, as they prepared for their journey and waved goodbye and slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God.
Very often, but particularly today, this program seems inadequate to tell it all and to share it all. Later this evening on the full ABC network at 10 o'clock, 9 Central Time, we'll have a full hour special on today's tragedy, and then even later this evening on Nightline, Ted Koppel and his guests will go as deeply as one can on a day such as this into this tragedy. The death of 7 American astronauts and mourning across the land and around the world. That is our report on World News Tonight. I'm Peter Jennings. Good night.